Well, Pete, welcome back. It's only about 9 days to go until the big day. That's January 20th, when we finally see the end to the Trump versus the rest of the world story, or will we? Now, in the week that was, we've seen a number of big things happen around the world. Signals that trigger trade, blackouts, power failure,
internet outages.
Internet outages in multiple jurisdictions. Jet logs show there was a bunch of guys cruising around. Was the trigger did occur last week on a Wednesday?
Good morning, Will. From a geopolitical front, all I know is over the last, say, 24 hours, it's been electric. You've had the Vatican down, blackouts there. You've had, and some of the stories coming out are just mind-blowing. Pakistan and arms sales to China for jet engines of F-16s, and that was thwarted.
It's old tech.
40%, yeah, well, the engines may not be.
Still require the rare earths out of Canada, which is a good thing.
Okay, yep, and 40% of Pakistan's power was down. So, and then you had simultaneous raids across Berlin. So there's multiple issues going, and then tracking logs as far as aircraft movement and out of Naples, US aircraft that is. So look, all I know is that we've had a week that was, full of intrigue, and I don't think it's over yet. I think this week could be a quiet one for the markets. Or will it be?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, so what happened last week, and did the markets basically, vote by taking their hands off the keyboard? I mean, there wasn't a huge range of movement across markets, although we should say that there's probably more trade going through earlier in January than many years prior.
Sure.
We also should perhaps point to gold and the events of Friday that basically saw gold decline.
Yep, 4.5%. We saw silver down nearly 10%. That's big brother. That's little brother. Silver had been massively bought up, and I think it was not only it outpaced its big brother, but it got to a point that that's why it fell so much more than gold. US dollar is now above that 90 point. You've got interest rate yields. The 10-year I'm noticing is above 1%. I think it was at 1.12 I looked at over the weekend. So yes, they're creeping back up. Where it plays over the next week, I think is going to be fascinating from a market standpoint, geopolitically, and what's happening as far as big tech and trying to silence a president.
Well, and some interesting headlines there too. Now, if we look at this chart here, we're talking about, and we touched briefly on the concept that, it might well be a quiet week for global markets. There's not a lot of central bank meetings going on, not a lot of key data flowing through, but there is things happening. There are things to trade on.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of signals, and up on the screen at the moment we have the US inflation expectations.
Roaring higher. Well, you can't inject across the world, but you can't inject, and with cheap energy prices, they're now back above 50 for crude. So you've had WTI and Brent really rally strongly to the upside. This week I'm doing a talk out of the Middle East. It'll be into Dubai, Gulf Intelligence, and it'll be a forum. They do these annually, and global speakers talking on the energy markets. And I've got the good fortune of sitting on one of the panels. I still believe, I hold a conviction in my heart, Will, that I think 60 is the headline number, that I don't think it's going to go above that. And that's a forecast after years of deciphering and trying to interpret markets. I still believe that 60 is your magic number. Do we ratchet higher and go to 80? I hope not. But I think that is really going to be an inflection point. As crude marches higher, so does the availability as far as the shale producers to really kick in gear. If you and I have got a well, and we're down at record lows as far as rig engagement, I think they're bound to about 2005, 2006 numbers when you look at those data, or that data. As crude prices, and it's an elastic workforce, so you're working in Kmart or Walmart or somewhere like that, and you're normally on a rig, and at $35 a barrel, you're not going to go anywhere near it because it's costing you 43 to pull it out of the ground. All of a sudden at 53, it's game on. So this is where it all changes. Very elastic workforce. They've made a lot of money over the last few years, these guys.
Projects that have been sitting there just waiting for the moment to turn them back on.
Exactly, CapEx. And a lot of these guys have done very well over the last matter of 3 years. Good energy prices. So they've had COVID, they've sat on a farm in Montana and going, oh yeah, just take it easy, man. And then all of a sudden, you've got everything changing. Energy prices are starting to gallop up, and they go back to work. So that's the issue I think could impact global production. And that's why I think that 60 number, one of the contributing factors of 60 being that more or less number to look at.
Well, Pete McGuire with the good oil. Now let's dig back in here for 2 more moments. I spoke to quite a significant player in the oil game just last week, and he was telling me that oil's got about a 15-year cycle yet to run.
Yep.
Not a lot of discoveries in recent times, and certainly when you look at production, there are only a few players really pumping it out.
Well, yeah, and the US is number one there for a while, but you've still got the big numbers coming out of Saudi, Russia, and then all the usual suspects. I got a message from my son on Saturday morning. He's a 25-year-old, trades stocks, trading Tesla. And he said, Dad, he's the wealthiest guy in the world. And I scratched my head and go, well, they only sold 500,000 vehicles. So, yeah, that's a good number, but it's not 5 million or it's not 50 million vehicles for the year. So, and I think that everyone's going to play a catch-up there. I mean, Tesla's not going to be the only game in town. I'm sure Toyota might have a crack, and maybe VW, and maybe
the Chinese have rolled out a new car, driverless, and we saw that over the weekend. It's on the road as of I think now.
Yep.
Fully automated, fully functioning, and in their words and the way they're describing it, it's on par, if not better tech.
Yep.
Than Tesla's. But we'll hold the thought for a minute and stay on oil, because oil, 85% of Saudi's oil runs down through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
Big tension there at the moment.
Well, exactly right, and that's that issue as far as Iran. It's always been a choke point. It's been a choke point really since probably the mid-70s, 73, oil embargoes, and what impact it has as far as from a distribution point. So the US and naturally the UAE and Saudis want to make sure, and Oman want to make sure it's, and now, and that's interesting, I just put I added 2 and 2 and I got more than 4. Qatar had been locked out. I used to go to Qatar. I'd fly into Dubai and run into Qatar or fly out of Abu Dhabi and go and see them there and do work with Al Jazeera. And it was very easy. It was about an 18-minute flight, 20-minute flight, I think, over from Abu Dhabi. And now they stopped it. You had to go via Kuwait or go via Oman. It was nearly flying around the world to get to, across. You could swim quicker. And big changes. Anyway, that's been quashed, and now it looks like Qatar's come back under Big Brother. And we all understand Qatar's got those massive oil fields, but more importantly, natural gas. So there is no doubt those tensions are building. What the Trump administration did, with the help of naturally the Israelis and Saudis, was to put together a geopolitical, I think, a storm front, to make sure that everything is going to be A-OK from an energy transport or an energy frontier moving forward, that there's no choke points. There's nothing going to get in the way. And the game that Iran's playing at the moment, I'm not sure where that leads to. It'll be a time and tell.
All right, well, let's take a quick look at the data. The choke point there, we've got several key OPEC producers relying on the Strait of Hormuz to export oil.
Yep.
You spoke about the UAE,
very
Iraq,
much Iraq,
Kuwait,
of course.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And on this chart, as you can see, there's 5.8 million barrels coming out of Saudi, and which is about 85% of the oil.
Yep.
And so if we're talking about the Iranians with a city of missiles, around this particular strait, why are they there? And is this the direct response over the last couple of years to effectively
those sanctions?
Trump's posturing?
Yeah, well, there's no doubting that, and the sanctions as far as the nuclear, and China's been able to take on board a lot of that Iranian oil. The other side, of course, is Kuwait sits right at the end of the Gulf. So it's right at the top of it, and then that Iraq sits in geographically just a fraction underneath it from a distribution standpoint. So it's such a. I've flown over there, and I had you fly into Dubai, and then you fly up. I went to a OPEC meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan, and it was a JMMC meeting a couple of years back, and very, very insightful. But it was a lovely trip up. I landed in Abu Dhabi, and I flew in straight up to Baku, and you just get a great appreciation of the Persian Gulf. And that Abu Dhabi, I think that really crystallises in a lot of people's minds. They hear of this Strait of Hormuz. Where is it? Well, it's just up the road from Dubai.
All right. Well, let's just take on screen at the moment. We've got the critical passageway, which basically show the effectively the oil tanker movements in 2019 and some of the attacks that took place on that strait. And look, we'll thank Bloomberg later for the map. But as you can see, the attacks aren't actually. They're in that region really. I guess to the west of there of the port of Fujairah.
Yeah, absolutely. So They're the big choke points. They're the issues. And if that Strait of Hormuz, that's why there was talk, and I read that about a week ago, and there was talk that they'd move that aircraft carrier, the US, out of Persian Gulf. Anyway, they haven't moved it out. They were looking at that from I think a safety mechanism, but it hasn't moved on. So, and it'd have significant firepower coming from Saudi air bases and UAE bases, and of course Qatar. So they're all under. So, there's many moving parts to this. There's no doubt Qatar coming into the field in the last 24 to 48 hours, being welcomed back in with Big Brother. It'd all be posturing for any chance as far as strikes or military action. I'm not here to.
It'll happen, right?
Yeah,
we're talking.
It
about
may happen. It may not happen.
Tools, big governments use to put out and publish and present that shield of influence. Look, diving back in, let's take a quick look at these the stimulus scenario here. Emerging market equities on fire. We see a little bit of caution creeping into perhaps other risk assets as the rising US Treasury yields keep investors on edge. On screen's the chart here that's talking a little bit about the stimulus that we spoke about earlier, and perhaps new relief packages and what it might mean. More cheap money, vaccines. Where do we go from here?
Equities probably higher. Rally, cheap money that is just at record low rates, so companies can do whatever they want to do. As far as for capex, spend, build more capacity. I think it's just an ongoing, continuing rally, unless, and the big unless has got to be, Will, does something happen left of field? I've been around this world, you only get one go at the merry-go-round, and I think that if you've been engaged in these markets for 30 years, 35 years, 40 years, you get an appreciation of geopolitics, of big things that happen.
And the relationship to trade signals.
Absolutely. And I got a mate that's got 4 kids. Great guy. He swam for Australia, and his son played for Australia. And he said, I was having a few problems as far as kids growing up, 10 years ago. He said, you can't put an old head on young shoulders. Good parental advice. So there's a bit of parental advice. Your young ones, whatever they do, they're not 15 if they're 6 and 7. They're not 27, they're 6 and 7. Or if they're 27, they're not 47. You're always a parent. But the issue is, you've seen a lot of things in life, and unless we get something dramatic happens that is left of field, that you would never, ever have thought of, that's how you change market sentiment. And at the moment, we lived through last week, but one thing for sure, no one in the world has a towel over their head, looking into a crystal ball, saying this is going to happen for sure. Because that is the future. And that's the wonderful thing with life, because it's all an unknown.
All right, so then the question directly onto that is, will stimulus hopes overpower social unrest? And will we see that Democrats take the Senate? And will that chart continue?
Social unrest I can't talk of, because I don't know. I'm living in Sydney, Australia. We haven't got social unrest here. In America, I'm seeing blackouts, I'm seeing internet bans, I'm seeing presidents restricted on how they access communication to the electorate. Can you imagine stopping a president? Regardless of what you say, he's still the president for the next 9 days. And, in China, the Chinese government run media. Maybe in America, the media runs the US government, because that's what they've done to him. So I've got to say, I spoke to a fellow in New York this morning, a streetwise guy, ex-drug enforcement, and he said, Trump, straight up guy. In other words, he's honest. What you see is what you get. He said he's not a politician. He's a straight up guy. So straight up guys tell the truth.
Or a version of it.
Or a version, but they're straight up guys.
What you hear is what you get.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean by that. When I say they tell it how it is.
Or how they think it is.
How they think it is, yeah. That's right, how they think it is. And that may be different to your view or my view. But a man's man that shakes a hand and looks you in the eye and you trust him on his word, you only get one go in life. And I've had business deals that you've trusted people and you looked them in the eye. And they're the lowest of the low, but you trusted them. Now that's what business is. You quickly find out when you live with them who they are. Another wise words too, and that's what trading is. Trading is you got to live it and breathe it. It's not something you do as a pastime. Oh, I might just go long or I might just go short. I believe you've got to be an active trader, has got to take on board all of the resources, all of the research, technical analysis, fundamental analysis, and looking at news.
Opinion.
Yes, where do you get your news from? And seasonality. What happens January? Oh, what happens February? Oh, Lunar New Year. What happens March? Oh, this impact, that impact. So you've got to be mindful of that, and that's why traders that are good seem to do it very well.
Pete, we opened up by saying, hey, there wasn't a whole lot of news, and we're talking a bit about the big news that usually drives markets. Now, we know the news of last week didn't really sort of manifest itself in big trades. We didn't see spikes, unless we're talking about gold coming off and silver driving up. But if we throw to these three headlines that we picked up this morning, just by scanning some of the news as we talk about as various inputs, we've got Trump planning defiant final week as Democrats urge his ouster. We've got the Trump chaos peaks. He wants his 11,000 votes and a riot. And then the final one here as it rounds out. Pandemics have always had or always bred some type of political lunacy. Societies develop resistance to both. The headline here is, will America actually achieve herd immunity to Trumpism? And so there's the balance. There's two out there sort of talking up the negativity and the chaos and the position there, and you've got another one saying, well, actually, have we moved through this?
Look, Will, all I know is a week's a long time in politics, or I think one of our Australian Prime Ministers said that. He said an hour's a long time, let alone a week. A week's like a century. So that's my response to question one. Question two, Trump chaos peaks. Man, has it yet?
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Keep on doing your research if you're a trader. Take on board what's happening with internet outages, electricity outages across major cities of the world, and what impact it's having as far as market movement. That's the best advice I can give. I mean, have a look what happened over this last 24 to 48 hours. They're big news events. So if I'm trading, I need to be mindful of those, what impact and what sweeping impact it can have. And then your last one, American would achieve herd immunity to Trumpism. I don't know, man. I don't know. He had 75 million voters. I don't vote in their elections.
Well, 85 Twitter followers that can't follow him right now.
88 million, I think it was. So, they're all big handbrakes. Who knows where we go from here?
Sign of the times. Well, let's wrap it there, Pete.
Can I just leave on this one thing? Those unemployment numbers that came out, non-farm payrolls, we didn't make reference to them, Will.
We spoke briefly on them last week, but did they actually mean anything last week in terms of actions and outcomes?
Well, they came out Friday night. They weren't strong at all. They were actually weak, and that wasn't a good sign, negative. So I've got to say this, that more people are losing jobs there, and that's possibly, the pandemic, certainly the winter, leading up to Christmas. I thought you would have seen a positive number, but it was a negative anyway. I just want to park that one. Sorry, over to you.
Well, wrapping it, I was going to say, if we put the non-farm payrolls together, yet again, immaterial, didn't really mean much, didn't do much.
No.
I think there was more COVID cases that came on in Canada than there were the jobs coming on in the US, and you sort of go, well, go figure, smaller space, get organised, people.
Yes.
I guess the thing to do today, Pete, is sit back, relax, and watch the headlines as they flow through, and we'll pick it up as we perhaps later in the week or early next.
I look forward to it, Will. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting week. I've said that a few times with you over the years, but I really think this week could be a standout.
Well, speaking to you this morning, you were pretty excited about news over the weekend, and I don't think I've seen you more excited about news than at this particular point in time.
Yep. Well, Yep. Let's see what happens.